Inspirational Creatives, Episode 3. Welcome to Inspirational Creatives. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. Join me every Friday as I chat with successful artists, producers, and creative entrepreneurs who share powerful stories and strategies. They can help you to create the life that you want. Listen each week as these inspirational creatives show you how to take your creativity to the next level. You'll learn how to create a sustainable business that inspires others and gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe in iTunes and sign up at inspirationalcreatives.com to get free exclusive bonus material. And now, on with the show. Rob Lawrence here, and welcome to another episode of Inspirational Creatives. Today, I'm extremely excited and delighted to introduce to you somebody who has been a tremendous inspiration to me and Sandra, my wife, with all of our creative and entrepreneurial endeavours over the last 5 years. I first met her in London in 2009 after the publication of her award-winning book, Escape from Cubicle Nation. Since then, she's gone on to achieve many other great feats and recently published an incredibly powerful book for anyone looking to tie the threads of their own story together. That book's called A Body of Work, and as an artist and entrepreneur, one of the most powerful assets you can have is an inspiring story, of which my guest today has many. She's a passionate martial artist and an incredibly warm-hearted and sophisticated entrepreneur, so I'm absolutely thrilled today to introduce to you Pamela Slim. Pam, a very, very warm welcome.
I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you so much. And I think that's the first time I've ever been called sophisticated. So I feel really good right now.
Oh, I'm really pleased about that, Pam. That's great. Is there anything you'd like to add to that introduction to give our listener a sense of who you are?
I don't think so. The one part of me, which you would find out right away were you to visit me in Arizona, is that I'm a proud mama of 2 kids, 2 dogs, and a wife to a wonderful husband, Daryl. And I have a great bonus son, Jeffrey, who's 28. So that's the other part of me that's not on my resume.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Pam. So I'd like to begin at the beginning, if I may, and ask, what was Pam like as a child and what did you enjoy doing?
When I was younger, I loved to read. So one of my favorite pastimes was to go with my parents to the San Anselmo Library, where I grew up in San Anselmo, California. You'll appreciate the fact that actually the Star Wars movie was written by George Lucas in San Anselmo. So at our city hall, there is a statue of Yoda and of Han Solo.
I love that. That's amazing. Great.
So I knew you'd appreciate that.
Definitely.
But I used to go to the library and would check out, especially over the school holidays, great amounts of books. I loved the Narnia Chronicles. I loved global mythology, kind of like baby magical realism is probably what was the most interesting to me as a youngster. And so my family were all readers, are all readers. That was one of the favorite things that we would do. So that was one of the things I can think of. And the other thing I really loved to do, interestingly, was to write. So I used to go up on our roof. We had this old house built in 1906. And I still don't think my parents realized that I did that because I was quite little. It's actually quite dangerous when you think about the shape of the roof. But I would climb up there and I would sit on the very top of the roof and I would write poems, and then I would kind of, stare out into space and, talk to whoever was that, universal spirit out there. So a lot of what I really remember in my younger years was about, reading and writing. And then the other thing that I would do was to go outside, and we have really beautiful natural landscape in Marin County where I grew up. And so there was one particular place called Phoenix Lake, which is a real beautiful lake that I would go up really as quite a young child. As a parent now, it just shocks me. I think I was probably 7 and I'd ride my bike there by myself and go walk around the lake, things we don't really do anymore. But I always remember really enjoying that and just loving being outside in nature.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I know in your books and your writings, you talk a lot about the people that you surround yourself with. Who did you surround yourself with and who inspired you as a child?
As a child, I think it was really, my life was really centered around my neighborhood. So we had great neighbors all around us, and we had a really close neighborhood. So our neighbors next door, the Ferrays, were musicians. Actually, Mr. Ferray was in a Dixieland jazz band, and then 2 of his sons were in rock groups. One of them was in Sly and the Family Stone, which people like funk like me would know, right? And then the other one was in Jefferson Starship. Other siblings were in kind of the music industry. And so I just remember there was such a rich neighborhood life where, first of all, there was always music that was happening next door at the Forays. So I really did get an early love for jazz and old jazz music from the elder Mr. Foray. And then it probably started my lifelong love of funk music because, the Forays were Anglo just like my family, but they were very funky. And so they would listen to the Commodores and, just really all kinds of great music. And so, that's really what was mainly the inspiration for me were, the neighbors that we hung out with. We had a really active neighborhood. My sister was a writer, and even at an early age, she's about 8 years older than me, but we had a neighborhood newspaper called The Stray that they would hand type each issue.
Wow.
And, hand color the illustrations. So it was just kind of a cool place to grow up. And that was my world when I was a kid.
What a fantastic and inspiring childhood. How did those early experiences shape you as a person today?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of pieces. It was really interesting when I was in my wedding ceremony with my husband. My husband is Navajo, and so one of the things we did for a wedding ceremony was to hold a all-night wedding ceremony, as one does in the Navajo tradition. And so it was inside. We had our family teepee, and then we had our friends' teepee that were put together because there were about 85 people that were there. So it was almost all Navajo relatives. And then I had my dad there and my bonus mom, Dee. And so we were sitting there, and there was a fire right in the middle that goes all night long. And my dad leaned over to me and he said, "The fire sparkles in the air. The smoke flies in the air. It is a beautiful sight. I like writing poems. I like being me, just me, the end." And I looked at him and he said, "That was a poem that you wrote when you were 5 years old." And and if we start to deconstruct it a little bit, right? First of all, the fact that I'm obsessed by fire, and then I end up, marrying my husband where, fire is used so much in ceremony, which I really love, was cosmic, that my dad could see that visual. And it was one of those moments where you think, do I have any control whatsoever over my destiny? Because clearly it was all predestined. But then looking at the components of, loving to write, right? I love writing poems. I love being me, just me. Is there any more life coachy thing to say than that, right? It was like early stage of self-affirmations. And the story my dad told was that when my parents got divorced, I was about 5, and it was very painful and difficult, as divorces are. And my dad was moving his stuff out of our basement, and which just had a dirt floor. And that poem was laying in the dirt on the floor. So he picked it up and dusted it off, and then he put it in a frame, and he had that poem on his desk for over 30 years. And so that's why he knew it by heart, is that it had always, been there. So it's really an example. It doesn't always happen that way, but as I do look at some of the early things that I loved, being connected in nature, seeing possibility, writing, always having this sense of magic and wonder, being fascinated by stories. Interestingly, a lot of the stories that I enjoyed reading, the myths and the legends were all following what Joseph Campbell calls the hero's journey structure, right? Which has everything to do about storytelling. And so some of those early things, and then, then I think also just living through the experience of a very painful, divorce, having early challenge, learning that as difficult as things can be, that you can still start things again and, make a good life, and that, challenge is just part of an everyday life, which has been a very important thread that I've worked with and that affects many of my clients. I think those are some of the things I see from my earlier life.
What a moving story about your dad keeping that poem. You mentioned there about challenge being a part of everyday life, and some of the best advice I was ever given is to choose the problems you like solving. You've talked previously about the right kind of work feeling easy to you. What work do you enjoy that you get paid for?
Yeah, I think really most of my work is work that I totally enjoy, and it's probably because I'm just genetically incapable of doing stuff that I don't like, which is easier as an adult than it is to be younger, because all of us sometimes need to do things that we don't necessarily want to. But I think the parts for me that are always just so tremendously joyful are the conversations that I have with people. So whether I'm working with an individual in an intensive coaching session or if I'm teaching a workshop with a group, but it's being able to have conversations with people where I'm able to use what I feel sometimes is just it's a certain gift, it's a vision or something where I can just feel and kind of sense like what some special components are that are inside people, or maybe part of it is being able to just create an environment in which people feel safe to say, I think I'm really great at this, and this is something I love, and this is something I'm interested in. And so to be able to nurture that and stoke it and then create a plan that actually allows somebody to build a business or build a career around those strengths brings me great joy. It's the kind of thing that I would do anytime. In fact, I can't really help myself from doing it. When no matter if I'm talking to anybody, I'm just always fascinated by their story and always fascinated to hear, really what's of interest to them. So that's one thing I think that's just really, really enjoyable. And the creation, I love to write. I love to create things and create stories. It is more. It involves more effort. I need to get myself really in the zone to do it. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's effortless, but my criteria for great work is not that it's effortless. I actually enjoy the effort often. Some of the suffering that comes along with creating things is very, very enjoyable in the end. So looking at writing a couple books and just hearing the stories of people who might read them and be affected in a positive way is just feels like the greatest joy, and I have so much gratitude for that.
I'd love to tap in and go a little deeper into your writing practice there, Pam. Clearly there are challenges that you experience, yet it's something you love to do. Can you describe to me about how you zone into your writing and your writing environment?
Yeah, I actually just led a writing retreat with my good friend Betsy Rappaport this weekend. So it's really fresh in my mind in terms of what I'm talking about. And there's one thing I love that Betsy says. Betsy was the editor for 5 of Martha Beck's books, including Finding Your Own North Star and Expecting Adam. She's worked with tons of people. And she says something which is so funny, which is none of us is so precious that we're able to escape sucking deeply in our writing. Like everybody needs to do that. And so sometimes you can tell yourself as a writer or as somebody who wants to write but is not writing that you need a perfect set of conditions in order to write. You need your pencils lined up a certain way, and you need music, and the weather has to be a certain way. We can tell ourselves all kinds of things. On one hand, those can be things that can stop you. But what I find are zones that allow me to really enjoy falling into writing is an open day, is having an open schedule where I can really just explore. I can dive in and I can be, referencing back things that I want to refer to in the writing. And I can just kind of get lost in the process, including having time to go outside and take a walk and just, enjoy exploring ideas. And so that's one thing that I've noticed that I'm always balancing, being a mom, being, having a full practice and being busy, is how can I carve out the spaces of time that I have learned that I really need in order to be fueling the writing process. So it's interesting. We were talking in the writer's retreat about things that you notice about what can help you getting your writing done. And certainly for me, having deadlines, having real official deadlines for my publisher of when my books were due was important. I do not think they would have ever gotten finished had I not had those deadlines. But as I think forward to whatever might be my next book, and I'm just, brainstorming different ideas, this time around, one of the things that I want to play with that is related to having more open space and just chance to explore ideas is maybe taking more time before I even go and approach the publisher about selling the book to really think and write deeply about, what the book is about. And it's just something that I've noted that makes me really relax into the writing process. And as I said, a deadline can be a great thing for getting writing done, but sometimes it can also create a pressure that blocks the full flow of creative ideas.
Yeah, I appreciate the power of deadlines. They're definitely something that works for me. You mentioned there about creating an open day, an open schedule for yourself. So for somebody who hasn't got much of an idea what that might be, what kind of things would you put in place and what practices would you follow to create an open schedule and an open day for yourself?
Yeah, one of the things that my wonderful assistant, Sheila, does, she's so amazing and is very thoughtful about protecting my time, which I really appreciate. I can tend to have weak boundaries sometimes. So I can have somebody who's like, but please, I can only record a podcast on this day, or, I need a coaching session or whatever it is. She's really good at helping me to designate particular days in my schedule where I don't have certain activities. So it taps into a different part of my brain when I am focusing on, coaching somebody or leading a class or teaching a webinar, where all of my energy and attention is going out at my audience, right? That's something that's really where I'm putting my energy. And so it's weird. Again, some of that is that precious, little fragile writer in me, which, sometimes I have to slap and say, just deal with it and get on with writing. But there just is something that feels different. And it goes back to this earlier feeling that I was talking to you about when I was a child, right? Sitting up on the roof, having just all the time in the world on a summer day, right? Writing a poem. There's something that just feels so open and free. And so one of the things I want to experiment with, I actually write quite well in my office. I have an office outside of my home because I found that ends up being the best fit for me. I've been here about 3 years. So I do write really well in my office, but I do want to experiment with maybe having some days that are just writing days where I can go somewhere else. And I do find if I'm in a beautiful environment, maybe I'll go to a nice hotel, backed up against the cactus desert or something, right? Where I can just see beauty around me and as a way to help nurture and inspire my writing practice. I think that would be really helpful. But just having some clear blocks around my time pragmatically as an entrepreneur has been really, really helpful. And it's funny because, there are people who try to wheel and deal. And, well, Sheila said, that you couldn't meet, but are you sure you couldn't? And I've gotten to the point where I'm like, no, she is right. She is saying that because that's the way that it is.
I love that. Sheila, your gatekeeper. A couple of great tips there. There's one is block book the time and protect that bit of time to do some creative writing. And the other one is to take yourself somewhere inspirational. You're clearly a passionate writer, Pam, certainly within the circles that I operate. Something that I see people and myself have grappled with over the many years is passion and that purpose thing. When it comes down to following our passions and creating a living doing what we love, how important do you believe it is for us to find our purpose before we leap into a new business venture or idea? Or have we got that the wrong way around?
I can't help but thinking about the song That Thing. Is it by Lauryn Hill, I think? So when you said that thing, that was the one thing that kept going in my head. So, well, that thing is probably the biggest thing that will derail creativity and forward progress, in my experience of many years coaching people, is where you believe that you have to find your purpose before you can take action. I highly encourage you to challenge that assumption. And there's a couple reasons. One of them is because I rarely have found people, they definitely exist and it's fantastic for them, but there's rarely people who can articulate a one singular life purpose. And, there aren't many people who I've tracked from the time that they're in their 20s to their 90s, because I'm only 48, right? So it's like when you look at really over your life, there are, look at somebody like my dad, who I've talked about a lot, who's a photographer and a journalist and a passionate community activist, and for his particular profession, photography, he's going to be 80 next week, actually, and he's still doing freelance photography. He's so passionate still about it. I always tease him because he will still get nervous whenever he sends in his jobs to his clients. And I'm just like, Dad, are you kidding me? Like, they've never not liked what you've done ever. And you're 80. Like, isn't it time we can let go? But he's just so passionate about his craft that he's always challenging himself. So in certain cases, I have met people like my dad or my brother, who's a scientist, who's kind of, been on a path through education for a long time. But for most people, at different stages of life, different things are relevant and important. In body of work, I talk about it in terms of your roots, plural. So we can have many roots, many things that anchor us to our work that give us meaning. So, beliefs and values that we have, passions. I think about different stages of my body of work. When I was in my 20s, I was a volunteer executive director for a martial arts organization for capoeira in the San Francisco Bay Area. And a huge root for me was about working with youth who were in some really challenging situations, living in really rough circumstances, being recruited by gangs or in gangs. And I felt so strongly and passionately that given the right amount of support and love and a creative outlet, that they could really create a great path for themselves. And so, that root was something that I felt so deeply. And I devoted 10 years of my life as a volunteer, working many, many, many hours a week to make that happen, and that was something that was so important to me in my 20s, and I'm so proud that I did it. At different stages of life, then that changed, right? Then I had my Escape from Cubicle Nation route, so passionate about helping people who felt stuck in corporate jobs to leave and start a business. So I think there are many things that we can identify that are important to us. And yes, it's helpful to have some kind of emotional anchor in order for you to build the foundation of whatever is work that you want to do. But very often through the creation of work is where you figure out what's really important to you. You can find certain areas of passion and interest by actually going through and creating the work. And there's so much discussion, I think sometimes too much discussion nowadays about kind of the pros and cons of following your passion. Is following your passion a, nightmare, and is it better just to get on with good old fashioned work? And I just find that, first of all, it really depends on the person, right? In general, I think people tend to be more motivated and interested and better at what they do when they find it has personal significance and it generally is of interest to them. I mean, that just makes sense, right? If you enjoy doing something, if you feel like doing that thing has a bigger purpose in the world, you are more likely to do it better and to be more excited when you do it, right? Does every passion need to end up in a business? Can you monetize every passion? No. And that's been the road to emotional disaster and financial ruin for many people who just say, all you need is passion. Well, it's not true, especially when you're starting a business. You need a market, and you need people who will pay you, and you need a sustainable, ongoing business model.
Yeah. I really like that concept of personal significance versus passion. They're two very powerful words there, personal significance. And I think if we think of what we're doing in terms of how it's personally significant to us rather than it worrying about it being a passion, that could be a useful anchor in terms of whatever work we're doing and how we're doing it.
That's right. And it could also mean including doing things at different stages of life that may not be totally exciting, but the significance is you feel really great at being able to take care of your family, right? You feel really great at being able to save money in order to do something else. I remember at the end of my consulting career, I was working on a really large project, for a company that had really nice people in it and everything, but it wasn't, I don't feel like it was the best use of my skills and strengths. I was very competent and able to do the work. It wasn't thrilling, but it allowed me to save enough money to take a whole year off as a self-employed person when I had my son, right? And that was invaluable to me. And I'm so thankful to this day for being able to have that project because it gave me time as a new mom and a 38-year-old mom. I really waited a long time before I had kids, and so that was something that was really relevant to me. And I think that's a very important distinction, so that we don't get caught up feeling like if we're not tiptoeing through the tulips and throwing rainbows and glitter every day, that it means that we're not doing important work. It's just noting when there's a pattern. If for 15 years you've done something that you really, really don't enjoy, that does not light you up whatsoever, then perhaps you can begin to make some adjustments to shift the course of your work.
Yeah. And I really like that idea about life being in stages. Pam, you tell wonderful stories, and I'm starting to learn more about the art of storytelling. It's something that's absolutely fascinating to me. Why do you believe it's important that artists and entrepreneurs perfect the art of storytelling?
Well, I think it's the most ancient form of communication that we have. It is the thread that ties us together, all cultures, all people around the world. If you look at anywhere in the world of the way in which we have passed on our stories, our values, our traditions, an understanding of who we are, it's always through stories and storytelling, which is why it's, a kind of cool that it's coming back in vogue, air quote, right? Because it just is, it is the thing for, if we do trace back to any of our roots, no matter where they go in the world, I guarantee you that are you to go to that place and you find somebody who's an elder there, they're going to be a great storyteller, right? They're going to be somebody who's, a keeper of stories. That's one of the greatest joys that I have when I'm sitting around with my husband's relatives, and especially the elders, is just hearing how it is that they tell stories. You just get completely transfixed because that's the way in which, culture is passed on and people feel connected and they feel loved and part of a community. So I think from that perspective, it is something that is part of all of us. And it's been around for such a long time for a reason. Now, we put on the layer of today's modern 21st century, 24/7 social media filled world. And I think the way that we can express ourselves and have people interested in what we're talking about and stand out, meaning we can be heard by the people who we want to hear us, right? If you're an entrepreneur, a creative, you're an artist, how is it that you connect with the people who want to hear your story? And that is where I think storytelling can be so powerful. I spoke a couple weeks ago on the Navajo Nation to a group of 250 artists that they show their work. They're part of a program that's certified 100% native made jewelry. There's a lot of, within the world of Native American jewelry making, there are a lot of knockoffs and things like that, right? As opposed to people who come from a certain tradition and make materials that are certified as being, solid materials. And so we were talking about, they often show their wares in Sedona, Arizona, in a parkland, which is where they set up their tables. And many of them that had been in the business for a long time talked about how, some of the greatest connections that they make with their with people who come to buy their art and sometimes, return year after year, is where they tell the story about where did this piece come from and what's the inspiration and what did it mean and, right, who is that person and what's their story. And I think that is something that is always so interesting. I know for me, I'm so interested often in the story behind the storytellers, like the Humans of New York photographer, Brandon, I think his name Brandon Stanton. I just posted a video yesterday on Facebook that was I think it was on Mashable.com, but it was a profile of him and kind of where the inspiration came for Humans of New York, which I think is just a great example of a multimedia storytelling, just brilliant storytelling, right? Great photographs with a brief description that always just capture kind of the essence and a nugget of story. And this is gripping. I think it's a reason why so many people are interested in that. So it is a way that we know is going to be connecting with people because we're wired to be responding to story as human beings. But even more, as there are more people that are in our field, as there's more information that's coming out, that is really where we can stand out. And I think it's a skill that we all need. And if you're an employee in a company, it's also about storytelling, right? How do people know what you're about? How do you get things done? How do you interact with customers? How do people know about you? It's often because of the way in which you're able to tell an effective story.
Can you tell me how, if I were interested in starting to build my own story, have you got any recommendations or tips or steps that I could take to begin that process?
Yeah, I think some of my favorite storytelling masters are certainly one in particular is Nancy Duarte, who has the firm Duarte, Duarte, which is in Silicon Valley. And her firm does presentations for companies. She's been behind a lot of the working with TED speakers on doing TED presentations, but she's written a number of books. My favorite probably is Resonate, which is about the structure of effective storytelling, especially within business, of how it is that you combine powerful emotional stories with data, with looking at, a story arc. And Nancy has studied it so clearly. She has a workshop, if anybody is, able to ever attend. It's a 2-day visual story workshop, which I attended in Silicon Valley. And it's just so cool. I mean, I'm just nerdy that way, just put me in a room to work on storytelling, but it was very different. Sometimes you might just learn a story structure, but there it's also very tactical, so that's one direction I think that can be super useful for people who are doing more things like presentations. And then I'm really taking my own path with it, with companion course to Body of Work, which is called Indispensable, where I kind of walk people through a lot of the exercises that we do in the book is all about excavating, what are your roots and what are all your ingredients and what are your goals and how do you tell a story? So that's another, I have a group that I'm running through right now, which has been a blast, kind of for the first time I'm going through, and I'll likely be doing it next year. So that's another resource for anybody who's interested. The other thing is it depends on how you learn, because another thing is just experimenting, right, in different avenues and working on it yourself and then bringing it out and seeing how it is that people react to it. That's just the very best way that you can test your story is, do people immediately shake their heads and say, oh, yeah, I totally get it? Or do they look slightly confused?
That's really cool. So I like that, your idea of sharing our story and gauging people's reactions. I'd just like to ask you some closing questions, if I may. What's inspired you in the last 7 days?
In about 5 seconds before I jumped on this podcast with you, I was watching a Nike commercial that was produced actually by, I call her my niece. She's the daughter of my best friend. So I've known her since she was in utero, her whole life. And her name is Jordan Dinwiddie. And she is a new copywriter at a advertising agency, Wyden Kennedy in Portland. And I'm just so astounded. She had the opportunity. It was a big project that was going on. For those folks who don't know, LeBron James, big American basketball star, was with the Miami Heat, and he's returning to Cleveland. And so it was a big spot that Nike was doing about his return. And, this is her first job out of college. And she heard that the project was going on. It was not part of what, was part of her performance plan or anything. And she just decided to throw her idea in the pot. And it ended up being chosen, her and another partner. And so at 23 years old, she wrote and produced this amazing, powerful, inspirational commercial for Nike. And I'm just like, and you know how it is. I've known her since she was a tiny baby, and I'm just so proud of her in so many ways. First of all, it's just amazing and really brilliant storytelling, which, you can see if you Google the commercial. It's on LeBron James's, Facebook page. But it's also something to me that just completely is in line with what it is that I'm saying in body of work, and also in indispensable, is like, you look for opportunities. She said that, she really wanted the opportunity to be showing people what she was made of, right? And it wasn't like they said, could you do this? She just said, let me show you what I got. And the fact that it was chosen is totally amazing, right? The fact that she had the courage to do it, and then she worked all the way through to produce it. I mean, in this case, of course, it's a very high-profile national commercial, which is a huge, big deal. But in any small portion of that, right, is really what we're looking for, like chances to contribute, using our skills and strengths and showing people what we got. I mean, that is something that it just gets me really riled up and excited. And I am such a proud auntie. Clearly, you can tell from my gushing. I'm just so proud of her. It's amazing.
I can feel that. The hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. That's just such an inspirational story. Pam, I'm really, really grateful to have spoken with you today. In fact, I'm just disappointed that there's not a few more hours actually to keep talking, because there's so much I would love to ask you. What are you grateful for today?
I'm really grateful for my family. I think the more time that goes on, the more I realize just what a fundamental blessing it is to be a mom, and in particular to be the mom to my kids. And I just start my day, with that, of just knowing how important it is to be present and available for my kids. And I'm just so thankful that they are here and that I get to be their mom.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Lovely. And finally, what exciting projects are you working on right now? And where is the best place to find out more about you and your work, Pam?
Yeah, well, I'm the thing I'm most excited about that's really going to be this next step in my own body of work is in really taking some of the core ideas that I'm working on with Indispensable. I had it wrote body of work, and with a mission of giving people some tools to really understand, what are different ways that we can think about the new world of work that are going to make us feel more strong and capable and not scared and, in control. So I, worked on the first program, which has been great to roll it out with people. And I really have the vision to be bringing it out to organizations, because one of the things that I'm excited about is not just working with entrepreneurs who I love and adore and will continue to love and adore, but I also want to work with people in organizations, because I think we overlook the fact that there are many great people in organizations like my niece Jordan, right, that are doing great work. And I'm really excited to, bring the conversation there, a lot of the energy and excitement that I feel in the entrepreneurial space, to bring it out. So, probably is going to involve doing workshops and keynote presentations and, maybe licensing programs, and just really working in a different scaled way is really exciting to me, because I just believe in developing this new skill set so that we can feel more solid and capable in the work that we're doing. And so in terms of where to find me, it's pretty straightforward. It's PamelaSlim.com. And there you can find all my social handles. If you're a LinkedIn person or Facebook or Twitter, all the handles are there. And I always enjoy it. You are so wonderful, Rob. You're always sending me messages back when I send messages to my newsletter list, which you can sign up for on my site. But I so appreciate it. People don't realize how important that that is when you're producing a newsletter to get a response back saying, I love that story, or, have you thought about this? So thank you for being that person, Rob.
No, you're welcome.
But that's a way we can stay connected. And I, travel and speak a lot. So if there are places where we can meet in person, that's always a great joy, is to meet my community.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Nothing beats the stories and advice of an expert to help you raise your creative game. I would love to know what you thought about today's episode, so don't forget to subscribe in iTunes, where you can rate and review the show. Your review is the best way for other people to find us. I might even give you a mention. If you like this episode, I invite you to share it on Facebook or Twitter with the one person you know who will benefit from the wisdom shared here today. You can find the show notes on inspirationalcreatives.com/podcast. If you have a burning question or a great idea for a guest, head on over to inspirationalcreatives.com/contact, where you can connect with me there. Join me next Wednesday in episode 4 as I reflect on some of Pam's suggestions for you. And join me next Friday in episode 5, where I'll be speaking to Joshua Becker about how minimalism can make your life more fulfilling.